Russia is advancing so fast in Ukraine that there's been speculation recently that a portion of the Eastern Front could collapse entirely. Then ammo dumps started blowing up. So today we're going to dive into the rapid Russian advance near Pokrovsk, how they were able to take so much territory, and how attacks 500 kilometers away might completely derail their plans. Now, to set the stage, it's important to know what we're looking at and where. I'm using Deep State Map here. This is a publicly available resource that I'll have linked in the description below. Now, on this map, the purple, like we see in the Donbass and Crimea, is territory taken by Russia in 2014. The pinkish red is Ukrainian territory taken by Russia since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, and the green is territory once occupied by Russia but since liberated by Ukrainian forces. And then finally, actually, the blue here is Russian territory now occupied by Ukraine. Yeah, not many people expected that to happen nearly 3 years into the war, but here we are. So starting all the way out, we'll zoom into eastern Ukraine, and pretty quickly you can see this bulge that's formed. That's the Pokrovsk axis. A little to the north, you have Bakhmut, and a little to the south, we have Volodar. Now, while there is near continuous fighting all across the front, certain areas are hotter than others, and the two areas with the most intense fighting are what we're going to be looking at today. That's Pakros here in the middle of the screen, and then the Kursk operation that Ukraine kicked off into Russian territory a little over a month ago. Now, according to a recent article in Pravda that we're going to reference for some details on Russian tactics here in a moment, they mention that Russia has massed as many as 8 brigades in the Pokrovsk area and has really solidified this portion of the front as the most important near-term objective, which is why it's so noteworthy that the Ukrainian lines there have been shaky at best. According to that recent article in Pravda, the Pokrovsk front didn't just crumble overnight, they say. Since February 2024, when they withdrew from Avdiivka, Ukraine's defenses have been retreating slowly towards Pokrovsk. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but almost every week. The first difficulties, they say, arose when the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade was replaced by the 68th Separate Brigade. The time when units rotate is one of the most vulnerable in the battlefield, and for the Ukrainian army, that's no different, and in this case, the Russians took advantage of that. Now, Pakros isn't just some other city. It's been described as strategically significant due to its role as a supply hub. It stands at the intersection of multiple supply highways, one of which leads towards cities in Donetsk, including Chasiv Yar and Konstantinovka, and houses a pretty regionally significant railway station. Now, control of the city, which the Russian media calls, quote, the gateway to Donetsk, would allow Moscow to severely disrupt Ukrainian supply lines along the Eastern Front and boost its campaign to capture the city of Chasiv Yar, which sits on higher ground, offering potential control of a wider area of the front. Now, squeezing the Ukrainian military's access to the road network in the vicinity would make it harder for Ukrainian troops to hold pockets of territory on either side of Pokrovsk, which could then allow Russia to consolidate and advance further along the front. For Moscow, the significance of Pokrovsk is massive. Pokrovsk is just 20 kilometers away from the administrative border of the Donetsk region, the line the Kremlin has been trying to reach since 2014, as Russian forces aim to seize all of Donetsk and Luhansk. So Pokrovsk isn't just one of those moral victories or defeats. Its changing hands would have a very real impact on the battlefield and the future course of the war. And while Ukraine and much of the international media has been drawn to Kursk in recent weeks, understandably so, Russia has remained laser-focused on Pokrovsk. Oh yeah, wanted to tell you that I just partnered with International Intrigue, and if you're interested in the topics I cover here, I think you're really going to like it. It's a free newsletter that provides quick summaries of the biggest stories around the world direct to your inbox every day. Gives you the chance to quickly skim the headlines and then click into any story you're interested in to do additional reading. Their readership includes leaders from across the foreign policy and defense industries, and again, it's free. The link will be in the description, and honestly, I think it's really worth checking out. Now, there are a few reasons Russia found such success near Pakros. A key aspect, one that Ukraine may have found a way to disrupt, is the clear Russian advantage in ammunition available. For instance, Pravda reported that a position held by 4 Ukrainian soldiers can be attacked by up to 80 Russians per day, and ammunition is running dry, adding that a battalion in the area would receive 3 120mm mortar rounds per day, along with 40 to 45 rounds for their smaller 82mm mortars. That's nowhere near what is needed to stop the volume of attacks they're facing there on a daily basis. As a comparison, Pravda reports that along the Pokrovsk axis, there are an average of 4,500 to 4,600 artillery attacks per day, with the number of guided aerial bomb strikes ranging from 97 to 105. Now, that's my comparing a single battalion to an entire front, but I think it helps still get the point across. Each day, Russia is dropping 100 glide bombs, and a Ukrainian battalion is getting 5 120mm mortar rounds. That's a problem. The second issue here is a shortage of soldiers. Pravda also reported that the 110th Mechanized Brigade, a unit that took the brunt of the fighting in Avdiivka, did not have time to fully reset and fill their ranks before being sent back to the front to try to halt this Russian advance. As a result, as of July, the 110th is operating at just 40% expected strength. Now, some Ukrainian soldiers and officers have pointed to the delayed and rather lackluster mobilization and how the issues at the Pokrovsk front are results of not mobilizing sooner. They just don't have the necessary people right now with adequate training ready to fill these personnel gaps. The third issue is the lack of viable fortification. So much effort went into building defenses along the line of contact that there were only so many resources and manpower remaining to dig secondary lines further and further to the rear. An example of that is relayed by a Ukrainian soldier talking about the Russian advance in Osheritin, which I'm sure I mispronounced, this previous April, where he said, quote, "Before the offensive, I received intelligence that the Russians were going to assault Osheritin, where I had no troops at the positions. I passed this information on to my commander straight away. But the commander of the brigade stationed there, the 115th Separate Mechanized Brigade, responded, quote, 'We have forces there. They're all there.' The next morning, the Russians started to walk into the town, moving through what were officially minefields, but in fact, there were no mines at all. After we surrendered these few towns, the front started to collapse at the rate that we're seeing now." So to try to stop this rapid Russian advance, Ukraine kicked off an offensive into the Russian territory of Kursk. At this point, it's proven rather successful in some ways, but not so much in others. As of this recording, Ukraine still controls over 1,100 square kilometers of territory inside of Russia, and despite some Russian media efforts to the contrary, there really hasn't been any sort of successful counterattack to really push them out. Generally speaking, Ukraine made nearly all of their Kursk advance in the first 1 to 3 days. Since then, they've essentially dug in and defended against Russian counterattacks. But there have been a few other small-scale crossings as well as continued deep strikes into Russian positions, but we really haven't seen much territory changing hands in the Kursk region in the last couple weeks. However, we also haven't seen Russia deploy any troops from Pakros to try to push the Ukrainians out. And this was something echoed by multiple Ukrainian leaders as a main reason for this Kursk operation in the first place, hopefully pulling Russian resources from elsewhere and forcing them to slow or stop offensive operations along the front. But that didn't happen. Going back to this Pravda article, they said in the first month after the Kursk operation, it showed that Putin, despite facing defeat on his own turf, did not adhere to the Ukrainian rules of the game. Russia did not withdraw its main forces from Pokrovsk. The Russian army continued its advance, advancing 6 to 12 kilometers in the month after the Kursk operation began. Another figure, the official number of combat encounters, as reported by Ukrainian general staff, confirms that Russian infantry attacks in the Pokrovsk area have continued and have in fact slightly intensified, again, since the Kursk operation began. Pravda says that they analyzed the number of combat clashes on the Pokrovsk front before and after the Kursk operation began and found that it had increased significantly, on average from 40 to 52 attacks per day. So if the line here in the Pokrovsk area was a risk of falling a month ago, what does that mean now? I mean, Ukraine has shifted resources to Kursk, and Russia has picked up the intensity of their attacks. This seems to be trending in an even worse situation for Ukraine. I mean, several officers told Pravda in that article they believe the city is going to suffer the same fate as Bakhmut, as in months and months of fighting to turn the city to rubble, and eventually it'll just fall to Russian forces. There was one more optimistic take coming from Sergei Filmonov, the commander of the Da Vinci Wolves Battalion, saying that one option is to cut through the Pokrovsk salient on two sides and encircle the Russian attackers. Quote, "There are weak points where enemy units have been hammered. It's clear where these are, where they're building up forces, and what their next steps will be. There are a lot of prisoners, and everything is known. The question is assets and personnel." But that's a big ask. For one, we've only seen a few large-scale counterattacks achieve any sort of success in this war. And second, with what units? Some of Ukraine's most skilled maneuver units have been sighted in Kursk. The 80th, the 82nd, the 95th, and rumors of the 47th Brigade have all been involved to some degree in the offensive up north. They can't be easily redeployed to another major offensive near Pokrovsk. But what if that Ukrainian response came through the air, with drones, striking deep inside of Russian territory? That's a little unconventional, but it's the type of thing Ukraine has had to do since day one to be able to stay in the fight with Russia. This past week, we've seen some massive explosions in Russian territory brought about by Ukrainian drone strikes. First, on Wednesday, September 18th, the Ukrainian drone attack struck the Toropets Northeast Ammunition Depot, a depot that has a capacity to store around 30,000 tons of munitions. In fact, that blast was so big, they were picked up by Norwegian seismic monitoring group Norstar, where they said, quote, each seismic event registered between 2 and 2.8 magnitude, with energy comparable to a small earthquake. Then looking at some satellite imagery following this strike, of the 42 storage bunkers at this location, 15 were clearly destroyed, another 17 were clearly damaged, and 10 more were likely damaged just given their proximity to some of the other destroyed bunkers in the area. Then on Saturday, September 21st, another ammo depot just 14 miles away, this one in Pokrovsk, was also struck by Ukrainian drones. This is actually the location where North Korean ammunition sent to Russia is reportedly being stored, and it's believed to house 14,000 tons of munitions. There's actually a great line here from Russian mill blogger Millinfo Live who said, quote, the Pokrovsk arsenal was bundled and some of the ammunition was dispersed, which means storage was decompressed and volume segmented. Thus, most of the ammunition probably remained intact. Did you see the size of that explosion? I don't know. Seems like a pretty optimistic take to me, but I guess time will tell. Oh yeah, and then another one actually went boom. I can't even keep up here. So also on Saturday, we got videos and images showing that the 23rd Arsenal of the main missile and artillery directorate of the Russian Ministry of Defense in the village of Oktyabrski, which I know I'm mispronouncing, was also hit by Ukrainian drones. So 3 ammo dumps in 4 days. So remember those 3 advantages in the Pokrovsk direction that was allowing the Russians to advance so quickly? The one mentioned by the majority of soldiers was the imbalance of ammunition that Russia was able to throw at Ukrainian lines. So taking out 3 major ammunition depots in 4 days is going to have an impact on that. It's just a matter of how much. Now, the exact effect is going to be hard to measure, but for some context, here's some data that Intel Schizo put together on Twitter. He said that Russia claims to produce 3 million artillery rounds per year, or about 171,000 tons of munitions. That means that those first 2 strikes, because I haven't seen a number tied to the third one, would have just deleted 25% of Russia's annual artillery production. That's a big number. Now, there's a bunch of caveats here. We don't know how full the bunkers actually were. We don't know what types of munitions were being stored there, and quite a few other variables that would come into play here. Bottom line, that is a lot of ammunition to lose in a short period, and we should expect to see a change in how Russia is executing the war in the short term. The way that is most likely to manifest is a reduction in the volume of artillery strikes, and the first place that would be evident is at Pokrovsk. Now, slowing or stopping the Russian advance is a far cry from reversing gains or pushing them out of Ukrainian territory entirely. So I don't want to present these ammo depots going up as the thing that's going to turn the tide, but these strikes are the kind of thing that'll have a near-term impact as Russia will be forced to adjust ammunition consumption and distribution immediately. We should see these effects in the battlefield in a matter of days or weeks. But that's all I got for now. Again, be sure to check out International Intrigue, which will be linked in the description below. I really think you'll find that in newsletter a pretty valuable resource. And again, it's free, which is hard to beat. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.